Welcome on inside yet another edition of the Business of Social podcast powered by ST Digital. I'm your host, David Brickley. Each and every episode, we talk to the experts and get their advice and feelings and, all those things when it comes to the ever-changing digital marketing and social landscape. This show is no different. Episode number 66, we will be joined by the CEO of Shareablee, Tania Yuki. I'm so excited to get into really what she does, but she provides social content analytics for some of the top brands in the world and has spent most of her career in digital marketing, measurement, analytics. So any of you that are, really want to dig in and figure out what numbers you should be looking at. Anyways, I got a lot of stuff I want to ask her, Will, but as we always do, it's episode 66. A few episodes ago, we decided to switch from jersey numbers to ages. And I know you've been a big fan of what age, what is it again? How old is so-and-so.com? What's going on?
Thefamous.com.
There you go.
Age.
All right. 66.
I have a feeling this list may stop at number one. Number one, Denzel Washington.
Stop. The Denzel Washington podcast right here on the Business of Social. We'll be joined by Tania Yuki, the founder and CEO of Shareablee. Here we go. All right. She is the founder and CEO of Shareablee. Also, 40 under 40 back in 2016 as well. Tania Yuki joins me on the Business of Social. Also, we are simulcasted on Clubhouse. Like we just talked about, Tania, the technology is just incredible these days, how we can do it all in one. So
it works.
I'm so excited to talk with you today and get into, we kind of titled this winning, over culture and also building a winning culture. But I want to start a little bit with you. Can you explain to the listeners and the audience just what you do day to day over at Shareablee, what you oversee, and all the fun stuff?
Sure. So I'll sort of keep it brief so it doesn't turn into a therapy session, but unless you're into it, in which case,
Lay down on my couch. Let's get into it.
Yeah, right. Seriously. So listen, I think the biggest thing that I'm doing right now at Shareablee, with my team, with our partners, and just sort of generally as we look out to 2021 and, and look, 2022, right, at this stage in the year, is just sort of try and tie what has just happened in the world and what is kind of still happening back to what marketers need to do about it across social, across their mobile and digital communications. So some of it is like future casting. It's a little bit about reading the data tea leaves, but it's sort of, I think what makes it interesting and hard is we're doing it while we're also going, gosh, how are our team feeling? While we're sort of trying to go, okay, how does society feel as a whole? You've also got to be looking inwards and go, how's my team holding up? How is everyone doing? And it's really, that's kind of tricky in a remote environment. We've just started thinking about real world things that we could start doing with our team for people who are comfortable. Like I had a business breakfast last week. It was the most exciting thing that's happened to me pretty much in my life, and as I was going, you have to mentally prepare, right? Like don't grab everything with your hands and shovel it into your mouth. It's okay at home, but it's not okay in public. So
I think we lost
all of these
audio.
sorts of adjustments.
Yeah. And I really want to dive into that because I think to share a cry together, let's go on therapy together. As CEOs, I feel like a wartime CEO over the last 12 to 13 months because not only did you have COVID and you had really this incredible year that just caused so much pain for a lot of people with, George Floyd and anti-Asian hate, and the list goes on and on and on. And as leaders, our teams were looking to us for kind of like, what should we do? How should we approach this? And like I said, I don't know about you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I did feel like a wartime CEO dealing with a black swan event that was COVID, that tested every business across the globe, but also dealing with maybe some of the largest civil rights movements and moments that we'll look back on 100 years from now, just how important those moments were.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I mean, I had to, so, I'll add another really fun wrinkle. So I also had, I had a baby in April of last year. So,
wow.
So I was like, why not just throw it all in? No, but it really does make you want to think a lot more deeply about, the world that you're in, the community that you're a part of, and what values matter most to you. And I think what what was spectacular about the last year was, whereas it used to be the MO of every large company to sort of, well, not every, but the vast majority to be kind of middle of the road, right? It was like, don't necessarily go one way or the other. Don't be too opinionated. It's not really your job.
As Michael Jordan once said, Republicans buy sneakers too, right? So he kind of stayed on that line just to make sure I'm not going to ruffle any feathers.
And I think what we saw in the last year is like silence is violence, right? Like it's not okay. And consumers, maybe because we were at home and we were grappling with so many things on a personal level, it was the first time where we were perhaps still enough as a society to realize what was important and to sort of demand it of brands. And I think brands largely have stepped up, and, some are still, if you're not a Ben & Jerry's or an Oreo or, some of these brands that were just intrinsically likely to take a stance on issues, I think some of those brands are still figuring out how to find their voice. We saw an interesting example on social media with a quick service restaurant, and they had posted like "Stop Asian Hate," right? And they'd gotten some vitriol back and some people commenting, and they were just silent, right? And on the same day, they also posted about their new apple pie. So you can probably, something about their apple pies, you can probably figure who I'm talking about. And someone came on and were like, oh, one of your apples was a bit brown. And immediately they were on social media going, we won't stand for that. Like, we're really sorry. We'll fix this immediately. Like, that's not in our culture. We demand a higher standard. And I was like, okay, this is an organization that was clearly not ready to be integrated on any sort of social issues. And the second they got a tiny bit of blowback, they didn't know what to do and they sort of retreated. But it means for us too, right? Like, we're a women-led tech company, which is not a very common thing. And look, we're a women-led tech company that right now is struggling to recruit women, right? Like, because I know there's been so much pressure on women in different ways. And like, we looked at our team too and was like, we need to make sure that we're being diverse, because diversity in people means diversity in opinions, in ideas. And that's so important to us. But it is really something that you have to sort of be non-negotiable about. You can't just sort of go, well, I'm diverse, so I guess we're all set. It sort of unfortunately doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and I think, so many people said, hey, you posted the black square, but what's next? And, making sure that it's just not a statement because it's what everybody else is doing, or you feel a need to speak up for your brand and what have you, but also making just actual action with that statement. For us, just as an example, we created after the George Floyd incident, I think it just made me really reflect as a leader and really trying to like, what can I do for change? And we created a diversity action plan, just making sure our jobs were on diverse job boards, making sure that, when we worked with vendors, that we were making sure that a percentage of that, and just made that part of our DNA and invested time, energy, and money into those things. And I think that's what the reason I bring that up is because once you kind of develop that and everybody gets behind that internally as a team, then it's really easy to make those statements. Then it's really easy to speak up on that behalf. But I'd love to get your thoughts. I really feel like as a brand, your DNA is the people that are a part of that brand or that you hire for that brand. So you have to make sure that everybody's kind of aligned with that vision, that purpose of what you are, what you stand for, before you actually kind of make statements on behalf of the brand as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, whereas maybe the more traditional approach was to try and be as broadly appealing as possible, right? And I think about it in the context of our company. And I sort of go, if you don't believe just intrinsically that bringing data into your marketing practice will make things better, if that's not something that you just go, oh, well, obviously, no, seriously, like, then I shouldn't bother trying to bring you to that. And I've done that in the past, right? And it doesn't work because you don't believe what I believe. I happen to think you're wrong, right? But that's okay too. It's like there's plenty of space for that. And I think just making what you believe shine so bright that the people who go, oh yeah, obviously, are just attracted to you is right. And that's true for your clients and your partners. It's true for your team. Like we've hired some stunningly talented people who don't love data, right? And you're like, I can't make you happy working here if you don't love data, because most everything I talk about will bore the crap out of you, and you won't, I am the person that you want to avoid at cocktail parties, right? So, and you don't, so much of your work life is spent there. And, like I started my career in law, and like I was good enough, like I was good at it. I'd trained for it. I didn't love it. And I know what that feels like. And, I think a big thing for me too, and particularly with everyone working from home and everything bleeding into everything else, you have to be really clear on, why you exist and what's important to you, and make sure that the company you're working for aligns with that. Because if you're not honest, like from an emotional standpoint, then it doesn't really matter what perks there are. And we saw that, right? Because the perks went away. You can't do free snacks. It's not as, like, a lot of that strips away. So you sort of have to love your work.
Yeah, I know we have some people in our clubhouse room too, so feel free to raise your hand. We can take questions or kind of take this in any direction you guys want to from a value perspective. I do want to touch on that too, Tania, because I think a lot of brands, a lot of companies, especially companies like ours, don't spend enough time on their core values. What is our purpose? Where are we going? And I think that's just so important. And I really say, I share my numbers with all my team in terms of our sales numbers and our revenue. And I've always believed that if your team doesn't know the score, it's really hard to play the game. And that scoreboard's so important internally. But also, if your team doesn't understand why you want a diversity action plan or why you're making these statements, it's difficult to really kind of like get the whole team behind that. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on, because I know people are listening to this to kind of build that winning culture internally. Because if you have people on the same page and we're all aligned on a vision, you can just unlock, 10x type of efficiency, 10x type of success, I would say, just based on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Look, I think the biggest shift and the hardest thing that I had to learn as a leader, and this isn't necessarily a COVID thing, but I think having learned it definitely helped as we were sort of going through what we went through, was, when you first start up, and I'm sure this was the way on your journey, right? You just attract people who are like you. And culture is not something that you even really talk about, because you're all sort of cut from the same cloth. You sort of intrinsically know what everyone's thinking and feeling and doing, and it just kind of happens, right? But that doesn't last if you want to grow and if you want to scale, and suddenly you're at 30 people or 40 people or more. And, you can't have a company all hands where everyone literally says what they're doing. It becomes ridiculous. So, communication becomes a thing, and you realize that, what you highlight, the framework that you use when you're hiring someone or when you're doing reviews, or, when something fails, right? Like because you innovated or you tried and it sort of failed, like the language that you use, how you assess that, culture is, it is in what you do every day, but it is also in stating it and making it very visible. Because again, it just means, people will say like, oh, for your expenses, like treat the company's money as if it were your own. I was like, I don't know about you, but if I think about my friends, like that's a very wide spectrum.
Yeah.
So I think there's some things of like what you're really saying is treat the company's money as if it were mine and apply my values to it, which may not be yours. So you do have to make a lot of that, I think, very transparent. And going through COVID, it was scary for everyone, right? Like when COVID first broke, I was 8.5 months pregnant. My husband actually got COVID right at that point.
Wow.
And I was leading an organization through the scariest, most disruptive time. I have a board, I have investors. Everyone was like, quick, lay everyone off. You've got to preserve cash. And I was like, no, that's not the right thing to do, because we need to be ready to ride the recovery. We need to keep investing in the right things. And I'm like, I think that's right. I'm really hormonal. I'm just going to go with it. But like at that point, you go, what do I believe? And I'm like, I believe that finding excellent, talented people is really hard. And I believe that I must preserve and protect that at all costs. And I will ride that to the absolute extreme that I can. And that's hopefully what your team sees. And what they believe. But, I mean, we're still a small company, like we're about 60 people or so. And I think sometimes employees think that we're much, much bigger than we are. I even had a team in our company refer to the management team as like upper management. I'm like, upper management is like, setting up your laptop and FedExing it to you. So, our culture is that everyone pitches in and sort of helps on stuff. So it was
funny,
sort of funny.
We both got started back in 2013. Our teams were about the same size. And it's so funny you say that because, I'm in an entrepreneur organization and same thing. I mean, the first week this thing went down and the country was shut down, lay everybody off, and I'm going to lay off half my staff. My guys, can we just chill for like 2 weeks?
Exactly.
Let's just hold tight.
Yeah.
Because, and for a lot of businesses, PPP came out and stuff like that. And guess what? That was your ability to keep your employees, on board. But I think one thing I learned during this whole time too, I'd love to get your thoughts, is the idea of vulnerability. I think as a leader, you don't always have all the answers, and sometimes that's okay. Actually, all the time, that's okay, in my opinion. Say, guys, I don't know what's going to come up. I don't know how the economy is going to react. I'm not sure if our clients are going to ask for, to pause their contracts. Here's what we're going to do to make sure we're in the best possible place possible. And I started doing, weekly memos to my team, and I got a lot of great feedback where even if the answer is I don't know, that's so much better from a communication standpoint than keeping your team in the dark.
Yeah, look, I'm glad you raised that. It's something that was that I implicitly believed, right? And there's one worldview which is like, and people say this about your investors too. It's like treat them like mushrooms, keep them in the dark, and you can complete that sentence. No, but in the end, I don't want to work in a low trust environment. And I wouldn't want it as an employee. And I don't want to lead a company where I don't believe that my people are smart, empowered, and able to sort of handle, what's going on. Having said that, right, it's like it's always a balance, right? Because if you're leading a team, you can be vulnerable, but you don't want to be distraught. Now, you may be distraught, right? But you're like, I'm just going to be distraught on my own time. And, I think there's always that balance of having enough of a framework. Even if you don't have a plan, you at least have a framework for a plan and a reason why you believe that to be true. And for us, I mean, I was just so grateful. We had our best renewal year last year in the history of the company.
Yeah.
Period. And I was just so grateful to our clients and to our partners who just, they also held their own ground, right? They could have freaked out. They were under a lot of corporate pressure to cut budget and to do all of that stuff. And they also said, what we do in social and in marketing is important, and we need to keep on going. We can't shut down just because everyone's freaking out. But look, it's always a continuum. And I'll say, and I hate to bring up, gender around this too, but I will, because I do think that, my theory on, is it different for women leaders and male leaders? I've never been a male leader, so I actually have no idea. But I do think that, what I've seen is sometimes that spectrum of accepted and sort of what behaviors will cause people to freak out. And I don't know if it's with my team as much, but with previous investors we've had, if you come across vulnerable, it's like, oh no, you're not sure, or oh no, you're crumbling. You're like, no, I just don't have enough facts, and I'm comfortable enough in myself to be transparent about that. But I think just understanding that, fewer people are used to, a female tech CEO, right? It just isn't, there's not the archetype for that. So, I don't know that I do anything differently. You're just sometimes aware of that and how that can potentially impact other people a little differently.
Yeah, same on our side, as a social first marketing agency, we had our record year last year, grew year over year 66% during a pandemic, which
congratulations.
The gratefulness. Yeah, the gratefulness and just the perspective of how amazing that is. But I bring that up because we're both in this industry together. And I think what happened during COVID the traditional marketing levers were pulled away. The billboard on Sunset Boulevard didn't matter anymore. The Times Square execution didn't matter anymore. I think a lot of brands kind of like were able to kick their social strategy down the chimney a little bit because they kind of talked about their big execution in Times Square and didn't really worry about what their digital strategy was. But I'm sure you got some of these SOS calls that I did, especially late last year, like, oh my God, we have no social strategy, or our current agency isn't doing anything and we have to get this social thing going, because you and I have been screaming from the rooftops, I'm sure, for the last 10 years of how important this stuff is. But it woke a lot of brands up, and I think they realized, oh my God, if we don't figure this out shortly, we're going to be out of business in the next 5 years. Like I think that's how serious it's gotten. And COVID woke up a lot of brands, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I like the big thing that we saw, right? So the biggest shift, I mean, I'd say publishers, media companies, they've always kind of gotten it, right? Like they've known that social is important. They've just, they've got amazing content teams and all of that good stuff, right? And even when there was that big crisis a couple of years ago where they were like, Facebook organic reach is dead. And I was like, not for ESPN, not for the NBA, like not for a lot of these organizations who make content that people want, right? So that's always been a little bit of a publisher brand marketer divide. The biggest shift that I saw was that the brands who a month ago would say to me, social, we just see that as a reach vehicle, or we only use it to run our ads, and we're only going to use, like, to basically see it as pipes that they can deliver messages for, suddenly came back and were like, gosh, we've paused on all of our advertising. Now we need to find our voice organically on social. What do we do? And I was like, well, no, but it was really, I mean, it was wonderful because I believe you've always had to earn the right to sell on social. I've never believed that social is a magical vending machine for sales. And I think for the first time, consumers held brands to that higher standard and made them realize that they needed to earn the right to show up, that they couldn't just pay their way to get there. And if they did, it wouldn't go well. And I think that just is better for our ecosystem as a whole. And it also opens up a lot of branded content opportunities, partnerships with publishers, with influencers who already get it and who are already, there with great social voices. And I'm sure, partnering with folks like yourself who can, make it human and make it real rather than very corporate.
Yeah, I just think it showed how important it is to have a community. Your consumers are following you online. That's the number one way you can reach your consumers is through social, through digital, through email, obviously. And sure, you can put out a linear television commercial. You can put out a billboard in a certain city, and that's great, and you get a lot of impressions. But the fastest way to reach your consumer and also to reach them on a more intimate level is through your social and digital platform. So what an important thing to invest in when literally that's the vehicle to talk to all your customers on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So, I mean, I think it's good for everyone. I don't think anyone should have been using social as, just a pipe to get stuff in front of people that they didn't want. It was always kind of a bad idea. And I hope that it lasts. I really hope that it's persistent.
Yeah. So two things. Obviously, I think brands are starting to understand we need to have a consistent content strategy. We need to make sure we are, really being calculated on our social strategy on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. But also to our earlier topic, 68% of Gen Z expects brands to contribute to society and take a stand on global issues. So now that these Gen Z with just an incredible amount of purchase behavior, and these are the next generation coming up and going to be that new 18 to 34 that we all brands covet, that's going to be super interesting too. Would love to get your thoughts on how brands are going to have to evolve and make sure they are taking that stand on those issues in order to have that relationship with their audience.
Yeah, it's going to be rough, right? And I think they're already feeling that. And listen, you've got a whole wave of direct to consumer brands that just lived there already, and that was how they were founded. And it's, it is so for them, it's not as much of a thing. But like we did a whole study last year around the importance of purpose from a consumer standpoint. And listen, it was up there for all age demographics, but the 18 to 24s were the only ones who it didn't even, like, they were just so much more likely to demand that from a brand and to not even really think twice about it being something that should even be optional, you know. And it was, and like, you know, across the spectrum, like some other older demographics were like, yeah, it's kind of important, but price is also important and these things are important. Whereas for the 18 to 24s, it was by far the most important thing, right? If I don't know why you exist, then I don't want to know that you exist. And, you know, and that's kind of rough, right? Because there's a lot of products, you know, and even if you think about it in the context of, okay, so let's say we believe this is true, and let's say I'm a brand and I want to communicate how I'm mission driven. How do I do that, right? You mentioned TV advertising. I don't know if you saw this, but it was just so bad that I'm going to call it out, right? There was this, I think it was a commercial, I think it was Lexus, and it was a TV ad, and it was literally like, if you are a skater or a tech adopter or a eco-conscious, like literally went through the spectrum of all personas and had a person in the ad. And I was like, that is market research gone wrong, right? You know, that's trying to be something for everyone, and you eventually just become nothing to anyone. You know, it's just not good enough. And if you look at the sentiment online, like everyone called that out. So it's going to be a big adjustment, you know, it's really, and that's why I think data and insights can be helpful, but brands are going to have to be braver than ever before. And that's kind of scary.
And I think you almost have to shed that skin, if you will, of your consumers or customers that are turned off by that or don't like that or don't, you know. I think the NFL saw that with how many people were upset by kneeling and things like that. But at the end of the day, the owners started kneeling with the players, and they understand it's more about our mission and purpose as a collective league. So they kind of leaned into it, but they turned a lot of people off. But I think that's the scary thing, right? Because we've gone from let's not rock the boat too much, let's keep it super gray area, let's keep it vague, to now you have to make a stand on the right side of history, hopefully. And that's just kind of, some people are going to leave your brand because of that. You have to be okay with that.
Yeah. And I would go even further. I think you have to embrace it, right? Like you almost need to know who you are going to put off and just embrace that. Because if you go middle of the road, if you try to not offend, you know, you'll hear, like we'll hear sometimes questions, you know, from marketers or content creators are like, well, you know, how can I keep my existing audience who believe this, but I really want to attract these other people, and then I don't want to offend. You're like, you can't, right? Like it's, you know, create 3 different brands and market one to each sort of thing. You know, I think there is that, again, that concept of bravery and being willing to put off the people that don't believe what you believe in service of finding more of those people to whom it will seem obvious and natural.
That's such a great point. It's like, how do I make an intimate connection, but not leave anybody out, but not turn anybody off? Like the answer is you can't really do that. So once you come to that realization, I think it makes it a little bit easier, because I do think people are so worried about what the offshoot of that may be.
Yeah. And look, and as well they should, because I guess they're held to sales goals too. And to your point, you know, everyone needs shoes, but, you know, but again, I just don't think that that's what the future of retail or what the future of content is. You know, it's you really do have to take a stand. And honestly, like for the first time, I even felt that way. Like I was writing a newsletter around the time of Black Lives Matter. And, you know, ordinarily you'd be like, okay, you know, we're research, we're marketing insights, we won't take a stand. I was like, we will. And you know what, like, if someone unsubscribes because they don't like it, like it's good, you know. Like you probably, you know, that's okay, you know.
What's interesting too is you look at business and the history of business. Like Blockbuster went out of business because they refused to innovate and change. And here comes Netflix that will send your DVD straight to your mail. Then they'll give you a streaming option where you just have to log on your computer, what have you. So Blockbuster goes away. You can make an argument that the next generation of that is going to be, hey, are you a social focused brand? Do you have a purpose? Do you have a mission? And if you don't, you're going to kind of be left with the old school folks and businesses that got left behind. in the 90s and 2000s when they refused to innovate and go more on the tech side. So I think it's, I mean, I'm not sure if you agree, but I think it's the exact same type of situation that we're sitting in, where if you don't choose, even if you don't want to do it, it's like for business reasons, it's really important to at least consider that, because you're going to be left behind if you don't.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, having such a cultural moment that was local, it was national, and it was global, right? It all sort of came together. It was personal, it was professional, it was socioeconomic. It really, I think, catalyzed change and woke many of us up to, to recommitting to what we believe and not being too busy or too distracted to pay attention to that. And unfortunately, it surfaced perhaps.
It's so hard to know that you're in history when you're in history, but 50 states and 18 countries marching at the same time for Black Lives Matter, that's never happened in the history of the globe. Like, that's how big this is, and that's a statement that the next generation is making as well. So that it's so large, and to your point, it's just, I think a lot of people are standing up and saying this is what the future is going to be. So either let's do this thing together, or you may be left behind.
No, absolutely.
I would love to get your thoughts on kind of being in the analytic game and helping your clients so much with the data. Katie Daly, I think she's listening here on Clubhouse. What's up, Katie?
Hey, Katie.
She was on our one of our last podcast episodes, and I love what she said about, and I'm sure you've seen this too, like even Clubhouse, right? Like, ooh, should we be on Clubhouse? Should we be on TikTok? Should we also be on this and that? And this width versus depth strategy. I always say, like, if you're just operating at 21% across Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, etc., that's not really the game. Let's try to get a lot more deeper on these platforms and only go to a new platform. You could try it out. You can play in the sandbox, but don't try to just every time a new platform, a new feature releases, try to jump and spread your resources too thin. So from an analytical standpoint and data and your partners, what are some of your recommendations when it comes to, I think people see the shiny object, they want to jump really quickly before they even really learn their audience on the platform before. Mm-hmm. Amen. Yep. Yes. 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 Yeah. Yeah, and I think people get really scared to not have a full-on deck launch strategy plan as they go into a new platform. But what I always say too, if you're Monster Energy and you just want to like play around in TikTok for a while, nobody's going to go back a year from now like, oh my God, did you see Monster Energy only posted once every 2 weeks? And did you see that their first ever post was kind of like weird and raw? Like nobody goes back and scrolls and judges you that way. So I think, being able to play around in those sandboxes, I think especially with a mature platform like Instagram, so much more difficult to grow an organic following than a new emerging platform like TikTok, just because it's so new and there's more of an ability to break through the noise of that fire hose of content.
Yeah, and having a culture at your company of experimentation and of small failures and small successes. Like I remember when Vine, closed down, rest in peace. I got a call from a CMO that we worked with, and she was like, I had just gotten my Vine influencer videos approved. So it had taken her almost 9 months.
Jeez.
Right. And I was like, well, maybe you can repurpose those videos for another platform.
Yeah. I want to talk about vanity metrics like followers for a second, because I'm sure you're passionate about this, as am I, but so many people, so many brands, so many, I think CMOs are so focused on, I want to get to 3 million followers on Instagram, which, can definitely be part of your growth strategy, but not taking enough time to say, well, we're reaching 7% of our audience every time we post. Would you rather have that, or would you rather have double the following and only reach 1% of your audience, which actually is less people? So what are some of your best practices or just the way you break it down for clients? Because I know you get that same feedback, which is, I want to grow my following, when at the end of the day, it's all about engagement and reach.
Yeah, listen, not to throw any particular segment of a company under the bus, but the fascination with big vanity numbers often comes from the C-suite, right? Yes. It often comes from, maybe not being as close to each of the channels, and and it's bragging rights, right? Like it's sort of it's a great external validator. It's showing people how big your house is, right? Not how it is inside, not the fact that there's no furniture or no one's in it, or it's
and also for business, right? Like how much revenue you made versus profit. Like, would you rather make 5 million a year and make 2 million in profit, or make 30 million a year and make 1.5 million in profit?
Right, exactly. And I think like my personal rant, so I've been in measurement and insights for many years, right? And I literally had a deck years ago when I was still at a company called ComScore and I was building their video measurement product. I had a deck that was called Getting Beyond Big, right? So back since that time, I have been trying to convince people that big vanity numbers are not the only important thing. And I have failed pretty consistently and pretty spectacularly at every point. So what I now say is, it's an and, right? Like it's fine for the quick external validation that over all time, this number of people or bots have opted into something from you, and all things being equal, why not have the number be bigger, right? Who cares? Yep. Sure. But as far as like, if you're thinking about success, if you're thinking about value creation, if you're trying to assess, the impact that you're creating on your audience, on your business, it has to be about engagement. It has to be about the number of people that are viewing and sharing and doing stuff in your community. That's the only way to think about it. Because the other one, it's just an all-time empty, the number of people in your email list versus the number of people who open your emails, right? It's just
1,000%. That's a great analogy. I love that. How have you guys dealt with, I call it, well, there was a big debate going on in social last week about engagement humping and people jumping on trends and doing too many memes. And listen, I understand that not every brand should jump on every trend because that can be disingenuous and it's kind of like, it looks a little desperate. But I do think, there's a lot of people that don't agree with memes, don't agree with UGC sharing and creating that type of content, which my personal feedback on that is you got to give the people what they want. I said this in the last podcast. There was a lot of storytellers that hated the idea of reality television, but Survivor, Big Brother, American Idol did pretty darn well. So every time there's kind of a change in content or medium or how people communicate, I do think there's people that really get frustrated on people that choose to go that direction. But then a day, I mean, meme culture and resharing UGC content that your audience will like is really a huge part of creating that community and creating that dialogue. And I think some people get frustrated by that. But, you know, as you know, with the data, it is what it is. Follow the data.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to, like, I have probably a personal preference, and then I have like what my answer is for the world. Like, I would say, sure, you know, are memes making the world a better place? Are they educating? Are they informing? Are they inspiring? You know, is it what I would force someone to study if I could get everyone in a schoolroom and force them to learn certain things? Like, probably not, right? But guess what? Like, you're not God, and you don't get to define what people enjoy. And, you know, and I think the biggest shift in entertainment, period, right? And it's been a tough shift, and it's still happening, is, you know, the traditional vision of the writer director as the auteur, right? The creator, the creative. And like, you know, I went to film school, and it's like, in film school, it was like, what story do you want to tell? And what is the thing that you are compelled to communicate? And, you know, if someone was like, oh, well, what does your audience want? You're like, sell out, right? Like, go, you know, go away. Don't try and shape, you know, this beautiful creative vision and this story that I need to get out into the world. And it was kind of selfish to some degree, right? It was very focused on you as a storyteller and not so much on your audience. But hopefully there'll be convergence, right? If the story is worth telling. But I'd say everything in modern content and everything that does well today is the opposite, right? It's centered around what an audience enjoys, what will add value to their lives, what will make them laugh, what will make them happy, what will help them spread joy, you know, all of that sort of stuff. And, you know, I think it's a little tone deaf to assume that is somehow a less valuable pursuit.
Right.
But again, it does fly in the face of traditional media. It does fly in the face of the creative process to some degree, right? Like, if you listen to any, like, if you read any, I went through a big thing of like data and creativity, how can they work together? And you read about people talking about the creative process, and it's like nothing. And then I just knew, right? Like, I just knew what to do. It just appeared in front of me. I just got inspired. That's not audience driven, right? That's very, you know, me as a vessel for the divine, and I'm going to bestow this on you. And again, it's not how content works today. I think it's much more generous, and it's much more humble, and it's much more tailored to what people want. And I think that's probably good, you know?
Yeah, I think there's escapism content. There's content, obviously, that makes you laugh and want to share with friends. Like, I think we can all agree that Breaking Bad is much more impressive than Keeping Up with the Kardashians. It doesn't mean that those are both not pieces of content that people enjoy and gravitate towards based on, I mean, and I always go back to television and linear ratings, which it's very comparable to what you do, you know, once upon a time and still, right? Things are judged by Nielsen ratings. And those Nielsen ratings are able to determine how much money you can then ask for on your television advertisements. So if you're NBC, if you're CBS, you're constantly trying to rearrange that content plan to ensure people stay on your channel, to ensure you have more of an audience and people are talking about your content. And that's just exactly what is happening on social media, but people don't think it's that sophisticated yet, but it really is. It is extremely sophisticated, and you are programming a channel to a wide audience, and you have to constantly tweak and pull those levers to make sure your audience stays on.
Yeah, and unlike, you know, a traditional TV series or others, you're getting feedback in real time on how people are feeling about stuff. And that's, you know, like, I remember talking to a TV sort of someone who was like thinking about casting and stuff, and they were looking at influencers and thinking about who to cast. And, you know, we were talking about in the context of, can we showcase to them, you know, who has the most digital influence? We were like, sure. And then, you know, the guy goes to me, okay, you know, that sounds great, but like, can you tell me if they're any good? Like, are they talented? Are they any good? And I'm like, I don't know. Like 6 million people seem to think so every time they post something, right? So, I mean, I can watch it and tell you what I think. But like, you know, and I think that's, I mean, that whole mentality of top-down curation from that is really struggling. It's why, you know, a lot of audiences are revolting from institutions like, you know, the Grammys and the Oscars and all of that sort of stuff. They're still, you know, a wonderful way to showcase, you know, a celebration of music or film, but they're perceived as this sort of closed door, top down, you know, I'm going to tell you.
And to that point, I think there was a huge issue with Megan Thee Stallion not thanking TikTok for her rise to stardom. Like, people are really angry about how dare you not appreciate where you came from. And to your point, that kind of speaks to like, oh, we're higher than that. We can't speak down to, you know, to that level.
Yeah. So it is a huge culture change. And look, I remember when we rolled out our first influencer product, I was like, I'm just going to reach out to a ton of digital influencers and just interview them to understand, like, I just want to understand, right? Particularly influencers who like became influencers at like 16, and that's kind of all that they do. And the thing that jumped out to me in these conversations was, you know, there were these kids and they weren't sophisticated about certain things about marketing or anything like that. But my gosh, when you got them going on the ins and outs of their audience, they knew their audience cold. Like, they could predict, like, they were hairline crack sensitive to anything that their audiences wouldn't like or wouldn't resonate with them. And they were so protective to like take care of their audience and create things that would make them happy. And again, you know, it was such a different perspective where all other media says start with the content first and then target the audience, whereas this is audience first, and it's pretty revolutionary. Like, it will change how all content is created.
Yeah, you're some of them are doing 30 to 50 tests every single day for 365 days. And that really gives you a sense when you're constantly testing your audience on what they like and dislike, you can get a pretty good understanding of that. I would love, you know, I'm sure in your world and my world too, things move so quickly that right when you think you got to, especially data analytics, right when you think you got to master on something, it changes, especially with API and things like that. But we'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, I'm really big on, you know, what Instagram Reels is doing right now in terms of just like showing up on people's pages and increasing followers and things like that. The difference from albums and solo posts on Instagram right now, the difference from single, I can hear my echo. But the difference between single posts and tweet threads and how that affects the analytics. Would love to. Do you hear me double now too, Tania? Okay, perfect. All good. Yeah. So to go back, I think just from an analytical standpoint, just the algorithm, constantly testing the algorithm. I'm seeing so much on the real side, the difference from single tweets to threads, the difference from single posts to albums. Those little tweaks are making huge differences from a data standpoint and a reach standpoint. And just would love to see what you're seeing on your side.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I'd say, I mean, we saw it not that long ago with IGTV and sort of the boost that was getting from a reach and engagement standpoint. Stories before that, like I remember looking at stories data for the first time, and I was expecting that on a relative basis, stories might be like 20% of your overall reach or your overall impressions. And instead, in many cases, it was like 80% or 70%. Wow. So yeah, look, I think it does change really quick. You know, not that long ago, people were optimizing Facebook for shares, and then Facebook started to push meaningful conversations. So then it was more about comments. You know, and again, I think it's, you know, you in this space, you just can't get too comfortable, and you need to like dive in on something that you're seeing fast, right? Like it's the same thing with my team, right? Like when you were in sort of a bigger, you know, when we were measuring the web at you know, the company I worked for before, you could be very thoughtful and very deliberate and really think things through before you acted. And I feel like you know, I'm half exaggerating, but not really. I'm like, if I'm at a Starbucks back when I used to go and there were lots of people in it, and you overheard about a new video format that was going to launch, you'd be like running back to your engineering team being like, I heard that Instagram's going to launch this. And they'd be like, how do you know that person knew what they were talking about? Like, I don't know. He was wearing a nice blazer. I'm just going to figure, you know, but like you had to be so aggressive about leaning into what's next and change. And you have to build so fast. Like, you know, we're just about to launch Twitch and we're doing like live minute by minute Twitch streaming, which we've never done before, right? Like we always look at daily views and stuff. So this is our first like minute by minute sort of rollout. And I was like, but we can't take our traditional approach to measure Twitch. It doesn't work because Twitch is all about simultaneous live streams that are happening. And that data is ephemeral. If you don't catch it when it's happening, it's gone. So you have to sort of adjust and, you know, and change your approach and not be too wedded to your sacred cows either.
Yeah, one thing I always like to say to clients and listeners and people overall is these social networks are prioritizing their new features. Absolutely. They're not going to tell you that, but they're going to juice their algorithm so their new features work well. And right now, Instagram is prioritizing, again, not officially, but they are prioritizing Reels over traditional in-feed 4x5 video. That's just a fact. So, you know, for a lot of our clients, we are transitioning. If it's video, put it on Reels. Don't even think about putting it on the in-feed because that's just where people are showing, or I'm sorry, it's showing up on more people's feeds. They're pushing that content. And at the end of the day, not all brands and accounts are leveraging Reels. So it's less of a competition, less of a fire hose that you have to deal with. So those things in our world, I think, Tania, are just changing month by month based on not only new networks like a Clubhouse, but new features that get released probably every couple of weeks when you put in the YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebooks of the world.
Well, I have a question for you then back on that. So, I mean, given like something like Reels and like we're a Facebook, Instagram media measurement program partner, so we get stuff first, like Reels isn't measurable yet at scale.
Exactly.
What do you need in your conversations with clients to sort of give them the confidence to embrace some of those new formats? Are they just kind of willing to throw caution to the wind and just try stuff out? Or are they like, what would help bring more of your clients to more of that experimentation?
Yeah, I think, you know, by simply kind of doing those experiments and showing them the data and what's happening there, I think, you know, it is frustrating for Reels right now. And maybe they don't want to share that on an Instagram level because they don't want to show how much better it is to post on Reels versus everything else. I'm not sure. But once we kind of go over the analytics and the data and what we're seeing, especially when it comes to followers and follower growth, we're noticing that some of our Reels may get millions of hits and then we see a huge spike in followers. But when we look at the in-feed posts, there's nothing that shows a direct follower. There's not paid media going on. So you can almost attribute, although it's not a confirm, that, hey, we're not getting follows from these in-feed posts. We're not running paid media, but we're posting more Reels and our followers are going up. So therefore, our theory is, and kind of explain that, but as you know, every time we talk with a client, there's so many asterisks, especially in sports, like, you know, yeah, LeBron James retweeted us last week. So we're week over week, we are down across the board. Like we can't have a LeBron James retweet every single week. So that compared with COVID, compared with maybe a big Game 7 or a Super Bowl, it really tanks your data if you're looking at it month over month, year over year, or even week over week. But constantly trying to give those analysis points or those asterisks seems to help because we're all kind of learning in this whole thing together.
Yeah. So maybe it's just even a smattering of, you know, correlation, not causation, but it's still time aligned and it's reasonable to, you know, to make this. But look, anyone waiting for perfect, like the smoking gun, by the time you get the smoking gun, the opportunity's gone, right? So, you know. Well,
even too, we ran an influencer campaign during the NFL draft and it wasn't as successful as we hoped. What we realized though is that no other day during the year do more NFL teams tweet at the exact same time. So you're talking about an increase and probably week over week for NFL teams specifically, an increase like in 500% more volume. So to break through that fire hose of content is a lot more difficult, no matter how great your influencer campaign is versus maybe just a normal day of the week. So that's, you know, you're just learning stuff as you go. And like you said, you're trying stuff like, oop, maybe next time we won't do a draft. We'll do an influencer campaign the day before the draft. So you don't have to compete with every single NFL account in the world at that point. So.
Yeah, look, and that touches on something that we've been thinking about a lot, of just this concept of like, you know, as you think about what you're pushing out to social or to digital or to any of your channels, it's like, are you becoming a part of the clutter that people want to avoid? Right. Or are you becoming the main event that people are hoping will show up, right? And look, and all of us have become roadkill, right? Like, obviously it's never a perfect thing, but I think having that concept of what's happening in culture, how do I either leverage it, work around it in the case of your example, right? Like, don't try and compete with, you know, the noisiest and most, you know, attention grabbing sort of thing. You won't win, right? You will get bulldozed over, you will become roadkill. And I think getting clear about that, you know, cultural insights of what's happening, what matters, how do I intersect, but also like, how can I just, as my mission as a marketer or as a content creator, how can I make sure that I'm at least trying to show up and add some value and tell people something new, and as again, opposed, yeah.
I think with going back to linear TV, I like to learn from previous mediums as well. Linear TV, sports, they'll stay away from each other. Like on Sundays, they let the NFL own Sundays. The NBA, the MLB, we're going to try not to compete on national television because the more competition it is, it's so much more difficult to gain that audience. So the same goes with social as well. This may be hard for you to answer, but if you had to break it down in 3 to 5 metrics when it comes to stuff that you're looking at, and if you could only look at a few top metrics when it comes to social analytics, although I know it may hurt your heart, what are those things that you think every brand should be looking at least on a monthly basis to ensure that they're succeeding or need to be doing more?
Yeah, I mean, my top pick is the number. Like, it's a metric that we have, but you know, there's equivalents called your unique engaged audience. What that is the number of unique people that have done something with you or in reaction to you over the course of that time. I really like comparing that with your fans because it gives you a sense of like relative impact. But you know, I think that's a good metric. It's also something that you can look at side by side with your unique site visitors or your unique video viewers or others. Yeah. So it works.
So you're talking engagement rate, content response rate, those type of numbers.
Yeah. For this particular one, it's actually taking. So let's say you had 100 engagements on all your posts last month. It's a very different thing if 100 people engaged with you once or one person engaged with you 100 times. So it's looking at that unique person number. But then beyond that, you know, I'd say if you're only looking at a couple things, you definitely want to look at content engagement rates, particularly if you're growing, you know, like you want to keep a handle on, like sometimes people will be really focused on goosing up their followers or their fans. But if your content and if your advertising or your organic isn't pacing, then, you know, there isn't really the bang for their buck. You know, I'd say the last one, I mean, I know it got kind of deprioritized and because people were embracing it too much from a clickbait standpoint, but I really love like anything that shows pass along value or virality. So it's sharing, it's retweeting, you know, on Instagram, it's tagging people and stuff.
I looked at on Instagram saves. I mean, if you save something, that shows me that you really enjoyed that content and want to save it for later. That's an incredible metric.
It is, you know, and it's, I mean, and passing things along is like, I'm republishing your message to everyone I've ever known and loved. And that seems like a quite high bar, and sort of a big step. So yeah, those would be sort of my basics. I mean, there's a lot of really other cool stuff of like, you know, what do your audience also care about? What other things are they engaging with? What other content that can inform, I think, your marketing strategy and your content strategy? But yeah, if you made me pick metrics, those would be my top picks.
Awesome. I know it's hard. It's there's so many you can be looking at. All right, so I know I want to get you out of here pretty quickly, but a couple of rapid fire questions to wrap us up, and I think we probably have another 2 hours we can go on and geek out over all this. The change in social and also analytics and data. But I guess outside of Shareablee, what's one social or marketing tool that you personally couldn't live without?
Social or marketing tool? I don't know that I necessarily use any other tools, although I should. But I'm doing a lot of stuff right now, experimenting natively in TikTok, like learning just all of the different edit features and things like that. So, I'm definitely not pro level. So I think the world could live without me using those tools for sure. But I think that's something that I'm loving and that I think is really fun.
Hey, a little research and development, part of your role. It's all good. I always say in our industry, FOMO is such a major thing because things move so quickly. But anything you recommend that marketers, people in social, people that love analytics should be reading, following, newsletters, anything on a daily basis that you get a lot of value out of?
Well, other than your podcast,
I appreciate it.
I get news alerts for any topic, like for a bunch of different topics. I think the biggest thing I would say, other than the basics of knowing what's happening, directly in your partners, is actually looking outside of our industry and understanding from more of a macro standpoint. I think that so many of the problems that we're trying to solve on a day-to-day basis are either already getting solved or at least are getting thought about at scale in other industries, and learning from that and applying it to the marketing and sort of content space, I think is the best thing you can do. Like read a book or, read something that's unrelated, because it helps you get a bit more of a fresh perspective.
Yeah, I got so inspired personally just from studying radio and television, because it really is so much of the same things are just happening again and again. Again, I make the joke as well. People cut the cord cable, so they just would have Netflix, but now there's so many streaming services. Somebody's going to bundle all that up and call it cable again. So
you're absolutely right.
History continues to repeat itself.
Yeah, look, and I just started probably a little while ago using a great app called Good Pods that aggregates podcasting. It's got like a social component to it, and there's just so much clever stuff out there to add value.
Awesome. Well, my last question I always ask people is, if you could recommend one person in your network, any of your colleagues that you think would provide value and be a good guest on the show, who would be that person, and who would you nominate next?
Gosh, listen, I love, I'd go with Melissa Brenner. I always love to hear what she has to say. I think it's been, such an interesting year to see what the NBA has done over the most recent time period. So I'd say she'd be my pick.
Love it. Yeah, I think the bubble alone was more impressive than anything the government did. So that's pretty impressive when you do that as a sports league. So
yeah, but if you want to talk about a culture of innovation and of doing stuff first, right? It's there. Yeah.
I love it. Well, Tania, thanks so much for your time. Excited for you and I to continue to discuss and network and just be colleagues in this space together. So thank you for joining us. We figured it out, the Clubhouse podcast simulcast. I'm excited. So
I love it. You got to do one thing a day that scares you, right? Great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tania. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
All right. Well, first of all, producer Will, Furker, Justine Hall, coordinator, marketing. Who else? We got Sydney, Kate, all the folks that helped us do the simulcast on Clubhouse. So we're going to be trying to do more and more of those. You get the live version on Clubhouse. You have to wait about a week to get the recording. So if you guys are ever looking to, get some of this content quicker than anybody else and get exclusive access to the conversation, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, David J. Brickley, and we're always going to be posting those links and those Clubhouse shout outs when we do these simulcasts. But overall, Will, I think it was a very successful program.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts. It was our first time doing this. We're going to try to do more like Twitter Spaces, Clubhouse, live simulcast stuff. So excited for that. But yeah, so far so good. I think the first one went well.
All right, so much amazing knowledge that Tania dropped there. Will, I got another hour or two with her that I want to kind of just call her on the side, but just brought a lot of value. I thought the the statement on not only the algorithm changing so often, but we talked about engagement humping, which I know is your favorite topic, Will, and really what the audience wants and how we can learn from television and radio, and just a really good conversation. Again, Shareablee started back in 2013. STN started April of 2013 as well. So
that was an interesting point by you. I didn't realize the similarities there.
Yeah, same year in business, and also about the same amount of employees. So things are good in this industry, and great to Katie Daly actually recommended us to talk to Tania, right? So shout out to Katie.
Much appreciated, Katie.
All right, so as always, we'd like to thank David Furker, producer Will, for all their help on the program. We ask you to go to iTunes, check us out, maybe rate us 5 stars if you would so be kind to do so. This has been another edition of the Business of Social podcast. My name is David Brickley. It's all been powered by STN Digital.